Today we're going to research our materials and consider color and value. So in considering value, it's best to make a value scale if you've never done this before. I'll share with you a video demonstrating how to make a value scale from black to white using acrylic paint. I'll also talk about temperature, which we explored last week. And then we'll get into our color wheel and complementary colors. So complementary colors, as we'll discuss, are orange to blue. As you can see here, orange to blue, green to red, and purple to yellow. And here are three different scales where I'm finding the values in between my two primaries, similar to how I found the values between black and white in this value scale. In these primary scales, complementary scales, I'm at each time, say I start with purple, add a little bit of yellow, and increasingly a little bit more yellow until I get to yellow. And then I've got on the top of this chart is all of these middle tones mixed with a little bit of white. And then underneath is all of these tones mixed with a little bit of black. So that's an example of how you might make a complementary color scale. And these charts are excellent to have on hand because you can come up with some really complex tones that you now know exactly how to get to them. So we're going to set up a complementary colors still life. So on my phone, this is a bit more blue in real life, but it's a blue-gray, and then I've got these yellow flowers and vase, yellow to like brown. And if you want, you can. I suggest mixing all three of your complementary color charts. But if that takes a while and you don't want to go all out in that way, then you could just mix one that feels most relevant to your still life setup. So in this case, I might probably go with the purple to yellow, but also would be useful is the orange to blue. For instance, I'm looking at some of these grays here. There's just a lot of tones in here that are exactly what I would need in this still life setup. So even if I'm using different mediums than acrylic paint, perhaps I'm gonna try colored pencil and just explore different value ranges and different hues as I integrate complementary colors with colored pencil. The point is to provide a bunch of exercises, swatches for yourself, demonstrating what happens when you integrate colors, so that when you're working on a still life, you've got a whole inventory of swatches to say, oh, I need that tone, and here's exactly how I get it, right? And what your options are to get there. So in addition to these color swatches in acrylic paint, I'm going to suggest that today you spend the day really researching the mediums that you want to use. We're all using slightly different mediums, say different pastels. Maybe somebody wants to use acrylic paint instead of just sticking with ink. But whatever you're going to explore, I want you to make a whole bunch of example swatches where you're seeing what happens when. So for instance, here I have ink washes, and then I'm labeling, always label these drawings, because you're gonna ask yourself later on, trust me, even though you think you might remember, you're going to come back to this, maybe even in a year, and say, oh, what was that? How did I get that? So I'll always label what mediums you're using. So I'm gonna demonstrate here. What I first did, you could do this with paint as well, was I laid a few strokes of ink wash down, and then put my whatever medium I'm testing, one on top and then one on the side, because now I'm going to go over it. So what happens when you mixed mediums, you want to explore both like putting medium A over medium B and medium B over medium A. So you really want to explore your range. And there are multiple ways to go about this. This is just one example. You can also do swatches like this. Here I'm just integrating colored pencil. And notice there really is a difference when I put yellow under or a color versus on top of. Also, I'm finding that here in my ink sample. See, here's this is a oil pastel under ink, and this is the same oil pastel over that ink right here. So big difference when you put your lights on under and then a dark over. I've also got some samples here of, this is acrylic paint with colored pencil over it. So I'm both testing my colors individually and writing their names down. And then I'm also seeing what happens when I start blending them together. And here's a similar exercise on a yellow acrylic paint. So the combinations are endless, but it's really just about what materials you have and what materials you want to use and what might you be trying to figure out considering your still life. So I'm going to demonstrate here. I've already begun what happens when I put an ink wash over oil pastel. See, the oil resists the ink, and the same thing would happen with an acrylic paint. I've got a slightly darker tone here, and look, it's still resisting it. There's some beaded ink droplets that are sitting on top that could be wiped away. So that's pretty cool to know. And then over here, I've got, this is a chalk pastel. So my guess is that it's just gonna kind of, let's see. Yeah, a little bit of bleeding. It's not resisting it in the way that the oil was. Now I'm gonna come in with an even darker value. I think that I'm mistaken. This one color here is an oil, but you can see the difference of what happens. It resists any water-based medium oil sticks. So down here, I've got my colored pencils. So I'm gonna see what happens when I go over my colored pencils. They're wax, so they'll resist, but not as much as the oil pastel will. So yeah, I mean, make as many different swatches for yourself as possible. One last thing I wanted to go over is, as I've mentioned previously, it makes a big difference if you're not working with really thick mixed media paper and you're using paint on it. It really makes a difference when you tape it out so that it stretches the paper as it's wet and drying. So here's a difference between when I did that, I stretched this piece of paper by taping the sides, and this one I did not, and it's much more wrinkly. The one side to the right here, the tape did start to come up, so it's not as flat as it could be if I had pressed down. But yeah, I just used general masking tape. One other thing I want to go over, which I'll mention in the slideshow, but here's a better look at it, is with acrylic paint or say oil, if you're mixing your colors from your primaries, so here I've got ultramarine blue, cadmium red, and cadmium yellow. When I mix them, I get these the centers of this triangle. So these two colors mixed is this orange, these two colors mixed is this purple, these two colors mixed is this green. But why people buy, you'll often hear you can mix every color with your primaries, and while this is more or less true, There are some colors that you really will have a hard time reaching with these primers, such as cadmium green, cadmium orange. This is much brighter in real life. It looks a bit similar in this phone. Alizarin crimson, this gorgeous deep red, and dioxide purple. There's many colors that people buy tube, but here's just an example of why you might want to specifically buy a green out of a tube, because it can be hard to make. So keep this in mind when you're setting up your complementary still life, and consider what your options are with your palette, which you'll come to know and see when you start making these charts. And so when I mix these three colors, I get a neutral gray, which you'll also find when you're making these charts, these like beautiful grays, like really complex grays. And then burnt sienna is another great color to have on hand, which I use in this temperature scale, so going from cool to warm.